Well, hello everybody. Danny back from Deep South Homestead. Woo, just came in out of the heat, guys. It's bad. I got where I can't even wear a hat now. My head just gets so hot when I have a hat on that I have to take the hat off so the cool air can blow against my head, and it helps cool me off a little bit. Now, I'm not out in the direct sunlight. Now, if I was in the direct sunlight, I'd have to have something on my head, but being up under the edge of a porch or a tree or something, I'm cooler if I don't have something on. And I don't know, they're saying we're going to get a break possibly tomorrow. I don't know, we've been way over 110. We've got many days. We've shot actual photo of the heat indexes from the weather station. 121, 123. You know, it's like it won't quit. This big high that's over us down here just will not go away. Now that's the heat index, it's not the actual temperature. But you can't breathe in it. You can't stay out in it. I mean, it's like we wake up in the morning. It says, when I went out this morning, it said it was 77 degrees. I looked at what the feel like temperature was, and it was 86. That's just walking out the door at 5:30 in the morning. And then by the time the sun comes up, it just gets to be excruciating. Now, I'm in the cabin here right now, and I look, it's at 80 degrees here in the cabin. Yes, we're at 80 degrees in the cabin. Because you can't, it's off grid. There's no way to cool it down when the temperature outside is that hot. It eventually penetrates the walls after a while. So, guys, this is not going to, I mean, we just started summer. We haven't even gotten into July, deep into it yet, or mainly August. August is our worst time. And then, used to, when I was a child, about the first weekend in September, it started cooling off in the mornings. And by the end of September, we was in a light sweater at night, or sometimes a light jacket or something like that, before October the 1st. Was always opening day of squirrel season down here, and my daddy and me would go squirrel hunting, and we always wore a jacket because there was a frost on the ground. Those days haven't happened in many, 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 many years. So, just take care of yourselves, guys. This system that's controlling us right now probably isn't going to go away for a while. Now, the crops are all just about, I mean, even my sweet potatoes in my garden out there, the leaves are turning yellow and just wilting down. I mean, I've never had that happen before. Usually my sweet potatoes fare pretty decent, because it hasn't rained. It's been just dry for a month, you know, in this kind of temperature. My ponds are down, at Deep South Homestead, they're probably down 4.5, 5 foot. Now over at Pecan Grove, they're only down about, I think I looked this morning, maybe 6 inches over there. We got a lot of underground springs. I think we have 5 running into that pond when we built it. But, you know, I want us to focus on what are you going to do when things change. Because change is one of those things that is going to happen whether we want it to or not. And let's put it this way, we're being programmed to believe that we are the reason this is happening. The answer to that is no, we are not the reason that this is happening. This is cyclical. It comes around every so many years. It's just that it hasn't happened in our history of America here just yet. What we're going to be facing. Now, a lot of your more ancient countries, Egypt and Israel and places like that, they have China. They have history of a lot of things that we don't have history of. There are lots of things that are being put into position right now to compensate for things that we're fixing to face. I'm just getting hypothetical now, okay? What are we going to do? Like, what would you do? This is a hypothetical question. What would you do if tomorrow there was no electricity nationwide for, let's just say, a month, what would you do? How would you react? Would you panic? Would you starve? Would you die of thirst? I mean, now, think about what I just said. There's no electricity nationwide. Now, that means there's no food in the grocery store. There's no gas at the gas pumps. There's nothing. There's no water from your water faucet if you're on a municipal system. Your toilet's not going to work. You're not going to be able to take a bath. What does that mean? How will you survive? Now stop and think about that very question there. What will you do? Will you be a casualty? Or will you continue on like nothing has happened because you've made provisions for it? Wanda and I talked about this. And the bottom line is it's going to be tough. And our heat down here, it's tough. If it was to happen in the summertime, a lot of people would perish just from heat exhaustion. Because the temperature is like the heat index is at 123 degrees. We took a day last year. We had a day last year that it got up to, the heat index was 124 here. And I looked at Wanda and I said, you know what? Let's go to the cabin and see if we can take it. If we can't, we'll just come back to the house and get an air conditioning. So we came over here at 124 degree heat index, and it was hot. But we have power stations at the cabin. So we turned the power stations on, and we had a little fan blowing on us to help break some of the heat here inside the cabin. And when we went to bed that night, we put the fans blowing on us at night. Now, about 2 o'clock in the morning, the power stations ran out. And we had the windows up after dark. And the power stations ran out. And we made it till morning without any problems after 2 o'clock in the morning because the night air had cooled off enough that we could stand it. But now, to do that for 30 days, we have deep freezes. We have food in some deep freezes. That would cease to exist because it would either ruin or we would have to be eating like crazy, and there's no way we can eat that much food that fast. So what would we do? I mean, we stop and think about that. What would we do? We have determined that for us, we would immediately pack as much stuff into 1 or 2 deep freezers as we could. And what little gas we had for a generator, we don't have a lot because here in the South, in this heat, the gas just evaporates out of the cans. No matter if you put them in a building or what you do. I mean, it loses its ability to work. And we would keep them going as long as we could, and we would be canning as much as we could over open wooden fire if we could stand the heat. Now, if it happened in the wintertime, it'd be a whole lot easier to deal with because the heat would keep us warm, building a fire. But in the summertime, it would be really tough. Well, we're not on any kind of medication, so the meds wouldn't be a big issue for us. But I think about people that take insulin and different medications that require, being cooled down. I mean, I heard a statistic the other day that said if something like this was to happen, that over 60 million people in the United States would perish within the first week. Because you have those that are dependent upon oxygen, those that are dependent upon life support, those that are dependent upon medical machines. My brother, before he passed away, was paralyzed, and he had to be in a bed that had to be plugged up all the time because it kept air in the mattress. It kept him from getting bed sores. With the air would go out of that, and he'd just be down on a hard frame or whatever's underneath it. And I think about that because really and truly, we are not prepared for anything like this as much as we think we are. I'm going to say back in the day, our forefathers, the wells that they had, they were hand wells. They went out and drew their water by hand. They didn't require any pump to pump it. They had no running water in the house other than somebody running to the house with a bucket of water. My daddy told me that the bucket usually stayed on the porch, on the handrail of the porch, and one at the kitchen sink. The one outside had a pan by it, and you would wash your face and your hands in it. And then you would go inside, and the one inside was for washing dishes. And then they had one that hung on the porch with a gourd dipper that you would drink out of, and in that bucket would be a silver dollar at the bottom of it, because the silver would prevent the water from forming any type of bacteria. If there was bacteria in the water, it would kill it. And that was their lifestyle. They had no electricity to use. They had a wood stove. They didn't have gas or, electric stoves or anything like that. They had wood. And he said, son, we made it okay. We didn't have any problems. No matter hurricanes come through or winter ice storms come through. And he said, really, life for us, we didn't have deep freezes. We salted all of our meat and everything. It was all in the smokehouse. And he said, the vegetables were preserved in jars, or either they were like winter squashes, they were just sitting on shelves, or the Cherokee tan pumpkins, or just regular pumpkins. He said stuff like this just sat on the shelves. And the peas and the beans, he said we didn't pick them when they were green, we picked them when they were dry. And they went into pillowcases and he said, bags and stuff like this, big crocks and stuff. He said, we made pickles and they just sat in a crock. They weren't refrigerated. He said they didn't go bad. They was in vinegar. They just sat there. He said the butter just sat out on the table. He said it didn't go bad because it was pure. It had nothing in it to go bad. He said the milk, they had a, what was the name of that? They had a water house. That little stream there by the house flowed through it, and they set the milk in the little, they had made a way in it where it had these little box system that ran through the building, and it had a place where it puddled up in there, and then they had an overflow spout from it that ran outside. He said, and we would set the milk down in that water, and it would keep it not cold, but it would keep it cool. And he said, and if it did begin to spoil, he said, we just drank clabbered milk. He said it didn't hurt you. It was actually really good for the gut bacteria. And he would tell me that people today just don't know how to live. And I've often thought about those words that my father spoke to me. And I've read, back when I did read, my eyes are bad now and I can't really read anymore, hardly. But when I did do a lot of reading, I read a lot about what people did in the early days of America to survive. Now, there wasn't any, most people didn't grow any wheat. Daddy told me that you went to a general store. It's called a general store. He said there was no walking up down aisles grocery shopping. You just didn't do that. You gave the man behind the counter a list of the things that you needed, and he went and got them out of the back and brought them to you, and you paid for them. Now he said this was the standard and the norm until the Great Depression. He said, and when the Great Depression happened, then things, because of the world wars, World War II, things were rationed. He said, rubber, we couldn't get rubber for car tires or inner tubes and stuff. He said, us being boys, we would get the old inner tubes from service stations that just could not be patched anymore, and we'd make slingshots out of them, and we hunted with them, and we got rabbits and, you know, small game with the slingshots to help feed the family. Our shoes, we were allowed two pair of shoes a year. We were given stamps so that we could get shoes. He said, and the flour and the sugar was rationed out, so we could only get a certain amount of each, and if you used them up and you didn't have any money, they're just pure cash, then you could not actually purchase anything extra. Or most farms back then had a grain grist mill, and then a lot of them had sorghum mills or syrup making mills, and evaporator pans or syrup kettles and stuff like this. And many of them made their own sweeteners that way. They grinded their own corn into cornmeal and corn flour and would either barter or trade or sell to neighbors or people in the community that did not have as much or have the ability to do it themselves. Maybe the neighbor down the road had apples on the tree or peaches, and they would exchange some of the grain for some of the peaches or some of the apples or some of the plums or muscadines or whatever they had, sweet potatoes, regular potatoes. People bartered and swapped between one another. Now, back then, Daddy told me that neighbors were not close together many times like they are now. Now, the people in the cities have always been close together, but my dad lived rural, and he said it was quite common for it to be a mile between homes back then because people owned larger parcels of land. And livestock free-ranged. You had numbers that you burned into the side of your cattle and stuff like that. They were branded so that everybody would know each other's brand. The pigs, they let run wild in the woods, and they notched their ears with mark. They call marking their ears. That way, if somebody took a pig to market, they would know by the notch if it was theirs or not. So that was the way of life. But in the world we live in today, that way of life is non-existent. The ability to survive will be very, very difficult today. Because whether we want to admit it or not, or whether even I want to admit it, we've become soft. As a nation, we are very soft. We don't know what it is to not have when we want it. We're used to, if we want to cook something, we just run to the grocery store and we go through the produce section or the specialty sections in the grocery store, and we get all the ingredients we want to cook whatever we want to cook, even though it's not in season. It's still in the grocery stores. That has kind of spoiled us because Dad told me that they ate in season. Now, there were some things that they didn't eat in season. I mean, whatever they canned or had in a root cellar then was not in season. So therefore, they could have some things. He said, and when Christmas came around, there was no such thing as a tree with a pile of gifts underneath it. He said that just didn't exist. He said we had a stocking that hung by a fire, a wood heater. Most people, if they didn't have a fireplace, they had a wood heater. And they would hang a stocking in there. And he said we usually had a tree. And as kids, we knew not to really expect anything because we knew Daddy, the money was really tight, what little money we had. He said it was quite common for a man to work all day for 50 cents. And you would have to take what you earned to buy groceries and things to this nature, clothes, pay rent if you didn't own your property, but then you had to save money to pay taxes on. He said it's quite common for these things to happen. So I mean, he told me, he said, son, we just didn't have like people had. When Christmas was there, if you got a few oranges or maybe some apples, a peppermint stick, you were happy. And if somebody or mama or daddy happened to make a little handmade toy for you, then, oh my word, you were in hog heaven, you know, the old saying goes. Or if they happen to have been able to have splurged and saved enough money down at the general store that they could buy a baby doll or a toy truck or something like that. He said, you were one of the better families that had a little more money. And I sit and ponder these things. And I look at the lifestyle that we live today and the way that we're spoiled. And I think to myself, how blessed of a nation we have been to throw it all away. Because you see, at some point, the power is going to be turned off. Now, it may not be for an extended amount of time, but it will be turned off. And when it does, how will you make it? I mean, Wanda and I know we have the off-grid cabin here, and I have power stations, and I have solar panels to charge those power stations. But suppose it's cloudy. Suppose there's fires and the smoke covers the air and I can't get any sunlight to charge anything. Then solar becomes useless. And my power stations, once the batteries run out, they're useless. What then? We've tried to do everything we can to prepare as much as possible. But even in all of our preparing that we do, sometimes it's the little things that we forget about. We're so used to walking through a door here at the off-grid cabin. It took a long time for me and Wanda to get past this. The cabin is wired. I did wire it so that if anybody ever wanted to turn electricity onto it, they could. So it is wired before I close the walls up. For the longest, when we walked through that door, we'd reach and go to flip that switch, and I'd go, oh, this is off-grid. I forgot. You know, and I'd reach and flip it back down. But now it doesn't even happen anymore. We don't never flip the switches unless we crank a generator up and have it hooked to the cabin or something. And that's only if we're cooking breakfast here, because we have to have a generator to run a hot plate inside. But other than that, it's nothing. I mean, we have a little fan and we have 12-volt lighting in here. But even with that, could we draw enough water from the well to water ourselves, wash the dishes, take a bath, wash our hands and our face? Think about this, about how many gallons of water it takes a day for one single person to actually survive. Now, when Hurricane Katrina come through, I went 26 days with no electricity here. That, of course, I was a lot younger, but that was a big time eye-opener. I literally could not stay in my home. The heat in my home becomes so bad, the floors started buckling because of the humidity here. My wife and I laid 2 sheets of plywood down on our front porch, and I screwed the corners of the tent down with a drill motor to that plywood and screwed the plywood down to the floor. And we put a little oscillating fan inside that tent for at night. We had to sleep on the porch with that oscillating fan run. The generator was on the back deck. And we slept at night with that little fan sitting there running on us like this right here, sitting there oscillating. And when the generator ran out of gas, the fan would stop. And we would wake up when the air went away because of the heat and humidity. And it would let me know it's time to refuel the generator. Well, luckily, I was prepared when that happened. And I never had to go sit in a gas line anywhere to get gas for my truck or my generators or anything. And I'm sad to say that today I'm not as prepared as I was then. I've gotten soft because things have been at my fingertips, and I've become complacent with lots of things. Now, I do have a few more things now that I didn't have then. I have the ability to do things that I didn't have then, simply because of technology. But the bottom line is this, guys. What will you do if an LCE like the power's turned off happens? Now, when I say LCE, that means life-changing event. I don't like doing the SHTF. But if a life-changing event like that happens in your life, what will you do? I mean, at this point, the greatest life-changing thing I've ever had happen in my life was one day my wife and I went to the doctor because she had some issues. And they looked at us and said, she has cancer. And she has this long to live. Now, that was a life-changing event for us. And it was very startling because it was totally unexpected. And it made us really have to ramp up our way of thinking and the way we was going to live from that point forward. Now, we did really good for many, many, many years. We beat what they told us. But eventually, in the end, the disease won out. But the point I'm making is you cannot give up hope, because one thing I admired about my oncologist that we used, when I asked him, sir, in your opinion, how long does my wife have? He looked at me and he told me, he says, I have a PhD, I'm not GOD. And that really, right there alone, meant more to me than anything else that he could have possibly done at that moment in my life, in her life. But we all in our life at some point or other will face a life-changing event. And when we do, what will we do? Now, I'm going to make a suggestion. I'm going to suggest that you lean not into your own understanding, but that you place your faith and your trust in the Lord Jesus Christ. Because in Him alone, all things can be accomplished. It is He who gives joy in the morning. It is He who makes the sun to shine brighter after the storm clouds of life pass by. It is He who said, I am a friend who sticketh closer than a brother. It is He who said, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. It is He who said, no man will pluck you out of my hand. It is He who said, no one comes to the Father except by me. We were left with promise after promise after promise after promise. It is He who in Deuteronomy 28, 1 through 14, I believe it is, who laid out a list of blessings that He said would come upon us and overtake us if we simply abided by His statutes. It is He who in Samuel said, it is better to obey than to sacrifice. Because you see, Christ would rather us just be obedient than to sacrifice anything for Him. It is He who in Matthew stated, take no thought of what you shall wear or what you shall eat, because He'll provide that for you. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things that he listed will be added unto you. Now, does that mean that we can sit back and do nothing and not prepare and expect God to take care of us? No. Because if we don't prepare, he's going to do nothing either. He expects us to do our part. When the scripture says, wait on the Lord, if you look up that word wait and do your research on it, it's the same word as a waiter in a restaurant. It means to be busy. It means to be busy waiting upon yourself and others. And when we follow these simple little rules that the Lord has for us, it is then that all these blessings that he's promised us in Deuteronomy, all these blessings that he's promised us in the book of Matthew and the 4 Gospels, all these blessings will come upon us. We won't have to take any thought about what we wear or what we'll eat, because it'll be provided for us. And that's where my hope lies. And I hope that today your hope and your trust and your faith, when I tell y'all to build your faith, guys, that's what I'm telling you. Build your faith. We have things coming that we've not faced before. And I'm really pretty much persuaded and believe that most will not make it. Those without the Lord, I don't know how you will make it. And I just hope and pray that you will take time and that you'll get your life in order with the Lord, so that when these times come, and they will, it's not if, it's when, that you yourself will be prepared to either survive or to meet your Maker. Thank you, guys, from Deep South Homestead.